This is B2B Marketing Methods. I'm your host, Terri Hoffman, and I'm the CEO of Marketing Refresh. Let's face it, embracing digital marketing is daunting. This podcast was created to make it more approachable. Join us as we talk to CEOs, sales leaders, and revenue growth experts who will share lessons learned and tips from their own journeys. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining in today to B2B Marketing Methods. This is your host, Terri Hoffman. I'm really excited to be here today with a special guest named Nikkie Freeman. Nikkie is the founder and CEO of a fractional CMO consulting company that is called Flywheel CMO. And through the course of the interview and discussion that she and I have today, you're going to learn a lot more about her business and what her areas of expertise are. Some of the things I'm planning on us covering today are how a fractional CMO can help a company look at how they're investing in their sales and marketing programs, how an ROI model is built for businesses. She brings in a lot of a finance background as well, which I think is super interesting, and I'm really excited to dig into that with her. I think another area is just, building a budget, right? So part of ROI is how much am I budgeting and allocating towards my marketing and sales investment, and those topics and more that I'm sure we'll uncover through this conversation is what we're going to be digging into today. Nikkie has a really credible background in the marketing and franchise business owner industry. So I'm very excited to help you get to know her and see what we can learn. So welcome, Nikkie. Thanks for joining me today.
Great. Thanks, Terri. Thanks for the introduction. And thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to a lively discussion.
Yeah, I think it will be just that. I always find it interesting to talk to a fractional CMO because you're really helping with some of the most uncomfortable and challenging and tough to navigate conversations when it comes to investing in marketing. And so I think there's just so much that I'm hoping our listeners can learn from you today and learn about your approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's by starting to get to know you a little bit first. You have a really diverse background, and I want to start by kind of learning about how you got started in the business world, and then we'll take off from there. So where did you begin your career?
Yeah, sure. So I actually started out in a number of finance and analytics roles. My degrees are in business and accounting. That led me into more kind of finance and decision support analytical roles. Did that for about 13, 14 years. And then when I was at FreightQuote, which is an online freight broker, I was the head of analytics, and analytics started to make a lot of the decisions on marketing or feeding information for marketing decisions, even though it was a different department. But, this is back in, say, 2013, 2014, kind of early digital marketing. They were almost all of their marketing was digital. They were a very large online freight broker, about 700 million. And so we were driving a lot of those decisions because we had all of this rich data from, digital tactics that were being performed. Then an opportunity came up where the VP of marketing left. They moved marketing underneath me, and that was kind of the start of my marketing career. So I led both analytics and marketing there, worked there for 5 years. Then got a recruiting call to take a chief marketing officer role at a mid-market printing company that was private equity held. So I went there, did that for 6 years. When I first got there, not only did I run marketing, but I like to look high level and get beyond just marketing to see, what's the overall corporate strategy, and how are we going to achieve that? And it may go outside of the role of just purely marketing. And so I set up a sales team. I generated or created a new product development team, which was the first one they had. And so ultimately I became the chief revenue officer because my scope went beyond marketing into sales and product development, e-commerce solutions. So did that for 6 years. It was a really good run. And got to a point in my career where I wanted more flexibility. And I really love working with small to mid-sized businesses, and helping them achieve their revenue goals. You had mentioned I'm a franchise owner. I've been in that position for 20 years. So I understand the emotions behind founder-led businesses, and helping them achieve that is really exciting for me.
Yeah, that's so cool. You have had a very diverse set of experiences. I'm really curious going back to the freight company that you worked for, when you got presented with the opportunity to take over marketing, what interested you in that? Like, that had to have been, it's a very different part of the company, right? A totally different functional area. What made you want to dive in and take that on?
Well, it's interesting. So for so many years, I was doing the analytics on the back end of what's working, what's not working, then kind of got into driving decisions with those analytics. And I got to the point where I wanted to really be the one in control and making the decisions of what those ultimate results ended up being. And I was so passionate about it before I took on marketing. I would stay up late at night, get up early in the morning, and just consume as much information as I could off the internet about digital marketing and learning all the ins and outs of it. So when I was presented with that opportunity, it was a natural progression for me.
That was actually the next thing I was going to ask you is, how did you learn about marketing? I've always viewed marketing as, this is probably a very poor analogy, but I think it's more of like an apprenticeship type area of learning. And what I mean by that is, when you want to become a plumber or an electrician, there is a baseline of knowledge that you have to learn, right? Just so that when you start working as an apprentice and you're going on sites and being trained by somebody who's a master in those areas, you can actually grasp and understand what they're teaching you. And I think marketing is very similar. It's hard to complete a 4-year degree and then be ready to just dive right in. That's only the starting point. So what were some of the resources you turned to start learning more about kind of the fundamentals of marketing?
Yeah, interestingly, so I used HubSpot a lot. And this isn't, trying to put a plug in for them, but I didn't even know what it was they offered until I had consumed a lot of their content. So obviously they are the experts on content marketing. But as I was looking at things like, wanting to dive deep into understanding Google Ads and Google Analytics and SEO and what were all the best practices, they were coming up often at the top of the results with content that really resonated and met the needs of what I was looking for. And then after a while, I thought, well, what is this HubSpot? Is this just like a marketing, resource library? And then identified that they were actually marketing automation. But so HubSpot a lot, Neil Patel, just very now famous marketing industry gurus or, companies that back in those days, they were kind of, very early on, because we're talking again, 2012, 2013, 2014, right in that era.
Yeah. Okay. It's funny because those are some of the main tools I used to learn as well, because digital marketing is not that old or mature of an industry. When you're in the industry, it feels like things change so quickly and anything that came out a year ago is old already. But in reality, if you compare it to the maturation of any other industry, it's still pretty young,
right?
And still doesn't have widespread adoption, which is one of the reasons that I do this podcast. But one of the things that I really value about HubSpot is that they've created some common vocabulary, and I think they also make it more accessible and easy for somebody that doesn't know anything about marketing or digital marketing to get really onboarded into that world.
Right.
I think they have 100% figured that out. And that's, to me, the gold standard. When we have new employees or interns, that's the first place we have them start.
Okay.
Getting up to speed. Yeah.
Yeah. Which really kind of goes back to where you said marketing is like an apprenticeship. There's so much that you can learn in college, but one, the industry is changing so much, so you're constantly learning. And two, having some business experience goes a long way in maturing you as a marketing professional as well, because you need to know how all the dots connect, right? So it's not just what are we doing from a marketing perspective, but also understanding, how's that align with sales and how's that align with corporate strategy and, operations and kind of all the pieces, at least from my perspective, when you're in a leadership role, you really need to understand all those piece parts. And it's just something that you learn through experience and not through education.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think too, it sounds like you've had, because of the diverse background you've had, it really just maybe like a set of breadcrumbs led you right to the role as a fractional CMO. For those people listening that don't really know what that role does, so from my perspective, the title Chief Marketing Officer or CMO, that is a title that is very common in the consumer marketing space or with big B2B SaaS companies. But I'm starting to see it really emerge even more into more of an industrial or manufacturing B2B space. So I was wondering if you'd even just define the responsibilities of that role and how that role adds value inside of a B2B business.
Yeah, sure. So a fractional CMO is basically you're paying for a fraction of a CMO's time. Often companies don't have the budget for a full-time executive. You start thinking about salary and benefits, and it's a big expense. And if you're in that kind of mid-range of revenue, it may be something that you don't have the budget for right away. Additionally, I see clients sometimes that maybe have a couple of internal marketing people, but don't have a strategy. And so they understand that they need a strategy in order to achieve their growth goals. But again, they don't have the budget for it. So really a fractional CMO can play that part at just a fraction of the cost. So I will, instead of working full-time with one, organization, I'm working part-time for say 3 or 4 organizations and just charging a fraction of my time for each of those. So it's a really cost-effective way to get some high-level, insight, leadership, developing a solid strategy and helping with the execution of that without, spending $300,000 a year to do it.
Right. And so who are you typically interfacing with when you get in engagement and start working with the business? Who are the typical stakeholders that you're interfacing with?
Most often it's either the founder or the CEO. If they do have an internal team, then I'm working with that team and leading them, mentoring them, leveraging them for work that I, feel that they could, bite off and do. And then I'm also reaching out to agencies and engaging agencies for work that they don't have the internal resources to perform.
Okay.
In the B2B space, especially manufacturing, that's one of my industries. I know that you guys are really strong in that industry as well. I find that it's not atypical that they haven't been kind of on top of their marketing game, and especially when it comes to online presence and digital marketing, and maybe they don't understand really even how it's relevant for them in their industry. But it's been fun for me to kind of educate and break down those barriers a little bit and help them understand why it's relevant and how a good strategy could help them achieve their growth goals.
Well, and there are a lot of investments being made into the manufacturing industry through private equity and other types of investors. Are you also taking on the responsibility of helping that founder or CEO role develop content for the board to kind of help them understand what's happening with their investments?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because, that's one of the first places that a private equity firm is going to look at is, are you investing for growth? Do you have a strong marketing plan? Do you have marketing resources? What is your growth plan? That's how I got, the CMO role at the printing company was through private equity. And so, helping to tell that story. And I think because of my diverse background and having that data analytics, then I can tell it from a side that makes sense and resonates with private equity owners, which is more from the finance and the numbers side versus from the, branding and brand equity and buyer's journey. That kind of language, they might be interested in it, but at the end of the day, they're going to want to see the ROI, which is how I present to boards or, provide that information to the CEO or founder.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's what I really love about that fractional CMO role is it connects all of these different groups of people who are they have different pain points and they have different concerns, and there's no connective tissue. There's nobody helping to interpret what is important to each one of those groups so that they can understand one another. Right. And that I might be oversimplifying it, but I think at the core, that is a really core part of that responsibility. The role that you play is just helping everybody understand what's needed, why it's needed, what it's going to do for them, and then how to ultimately make that into a reality through implementation, right?
Right. And making a story of it. I'm all about storytelling, and data is a great place to start with stories. And so when I'm developing a strategy, it's very heavily data focused. Mm-hmm. And just looking, and data can mean, it doesn't have to be numbers. It could even be, looking at your competitors and doing competitor analysis. But I think even starting very high level at, is your brand positioned how it needs to be positioned in the marketplace in order to set you up for success and to achieve your growth goals? You might not even have. So before we start diving into, do you need social media or do you need Google ads? I mean, you kind of have to start at that grander level of what is it that you're trying to achieve as a company, as a business? And then are you positioned within the marketplace to be successful in achieving that?
Okay. I'm so glad you said that, because that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, what's a common starting place? If you start an engagement and you're beginning to get started, what are some of the, first couple of steps that you're taking to help figure out where this particular business should start?
Yeah, sure. So it's a number of things. So we'll look at a competitor, do a competitor analysis, understand your industry, and look at what are the strengths of each of your competitors. Mm-hmm. I also like to do customer surveys and customer interviews to get at that, space where, what do you do really well that your consumers or customers care about that your competitors don't do well? And that is really kind of what positioning is all about, right? So making sure that there is a differentiator there. I also like to dig into customer data just to see what's going on with your current customers. What size are they? Are there a bunch of small ones? Are they draining your profitability? Is there some kind of segments? Do we see certain trends? Understanding your high level KPIs that are common in marketing, like your customer lifetime value, what's your customer acquisition costs, what's your average order value, your retention rate, just to see if there are some concerning trends that I'll want to address in the marketing strategy as well. And then looking at what's their current marketing tactics, if any, and resources, and how are those performing for them. Okay. So I would say those are kind of the three big basic areas.
So I would imagine that depending on the personalities involved and maybe some other dynamics going on within your clients, and I'm probably basing this on a little bit of past experience of myself too, but do you often run into just like a level of, I guess I'm just going to call it impatience, like just like anxiety, like, this is great, Nikkie, we're hiring you because we know our marketing isn't probably doing what we need it to do, and we do want to grow. So, and we need you to help us figure that out. But how do they respond to starting with some of those steps that sound like they're going to take a lot of time before they can really get out in the market and get started?
Yeah. So I like to explain it to them that, and you and I have talked about this before, but just that before you have a marketing coordinator start executing on tactics, you really do need to have a strategy. And I don't want to rush through a strategy when that's kind of the most important part that's the foundation of the house. I don't want to just, kind of slop that together real quickly, because the rest of the house is going to crumble around it if it's not good. And so I think that's part of it. And then also setting expectations on a timeline to start to see results, especially in B2B. It could be a longer sales cycle. There might be multiple, stakeholders or decision makers that are involved in a sale. So it's not going to be, hey, we spent some money on ads this month, and what did we see from it this month? So there may be a bit of a longer payback, but that's okay. And you would expect that elsewhere in the business as well. If you're buying new machinery, you're not expecting it to have a 1 or 2 month payback period. So you're investing for growth, but just know it will take a few months to start to see that growth. And you'll get the leading indicators, which is why it's important to measure, everything. It might not be revenue from day one. It might be you've gotten a lot more website traffic, brand impressions, leads coming in, and so forth. So if you're starting to see the right leading indicators before you get to revenue, then you know that things are working, and hopefully that patience, comes into play there. Like, oh, okay, I'm starting to see that this is going somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. But I like the analogy you used with, buying a piece of equipment, for example, because I think just a trend I notice quite a bit is there may be a certain way and a certain set of expectations around different parts of a company's organization and all the functional areas that aren't also applied to the sales and marketing area. It seems like I see a lot of times that there seems to just be this completely different philosophy and set of expectations. And I always wonder, is that because they just don't know what to expect? Or is there some other reason behind that? But do you see that as well? Do you notice that?
I do. Yeah. So sometimes, manufacturers will make decisions on investments like equipment and other things without necessarily having a business case to show that there's, a return on that investment, or that return might be longer. But there's this thought or this expectations that if it sells in marketing, it's immediate, revenue generating. And if it's not, then those are expenses that are some of the first to get cut. And so, having that patience, and then also having the KPIs and the ability to tie it back and making sure you're measuring the right things is super important, because otherwise, if you're doing some marketing stuff and you can't show results from it and you can't tie it to revenue, then of course it's not going to stand the test of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, how have you seen that evolve too, just with the way buyer behaviors are changing? Because I think they tie together, right? What a buyer back in maybe 2015 or even 2019 was expecting from how they interact with one of their big suppliers or vendors, I think has really evolved. I mean, the data shows it, but just the reality of our own experiences and our own uses, like how have you seen that evolve, and how do you work with your clients to really communicate those changes and trends?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, buyers want to do their own research and a lot of it before they talk to anybody. So it's interesting. They still do see quite a few companies that rely almost solely on cold calling as their lead generation. And that's not how buyers want to buy today. So we've got to make sure that we're, as marketers, putting sufficient content out there for buyers at every step of their journey. So as they're researching and evaluating and looking at different vendors and wanting to know, who's the best one, then if you don't have a good online presence, you're not in that game. You're not even going to be in the decision set then for that buyer. So making sure, I think that's a story that I tell a lot of times as I'm talking to prospects, is just that buyer's journey, what that looks like, how they're researching, what terms they're researching, and then making sure that we have content and a strategy around that so that we're top of mind as they're evaluating their options.
Right. Yeah. And there still seems to be like a lot of hesitancy to believe that people are really searching for something that manufacturers do. One of my favorite things to do is to show them some data that shows how often their own brand or their own product names or their own particular model numbers even sometimes are searched. And it's like a great surprise to them to find out wow, people are actually looking for this. And it can't replace what your salesperson is doing to build that relationship. But I think it's more of a reflection of how the needs of buyers and the amount and types of information that they need is just very challenging for a salesperson or a BDR to produce on their own. Do you agree with that? And do you see that as well?
I do. Yeah. And I think it makes the salesperson's job easier. If you think about, the example I gave where I know companies, even as large as 100 million that rely on cold calling, I saw statistics that for B2B cold calls, the conversion rate is 0.02%. So out of 10,000 calls, you're getting 2 clients. That conversion rate for hand raisers, which is what marketing is going to drive, right? So if we get content out there and we're doing our job correctly and we're advertising and we're getting in front of the target audience, we're going to get hand raisers that come in that are going to be much more likely to convert to a customer. And that's going to be a lot more efficient for your sales team. So marketing is kind of seen as an expense, but look at your sales team and what is your customer acquisition cost with just a sales team? How much time are they spending to get one client? And if we could increase that conversion rate to say 10%, which is, it could go from 1 to 10% on inbound leads, then the math works out where it's worth it to invest in marketing, and you actually end up saving and your customer acquisition cost comes down.
Wow. So you're talking about another trend that I see really evolving right before my eyes, which is how does the relationship and the responsibilities, how between a sales role and a marketing role, how have you seen, those roles and responsibilities change and evolve here recently?
Yeah, I think it's got to be symbiotic. I feel like in the past it was kind of siloed. So marketing's over here doing some stuff that sales doesn't really know about, and there's not communication going back and forth. But if you're working effectively as, an organization, then your marketing team is providing leads to the sales team that are ready for a sales conversation. And sales is providing feedback to the marketing team on, hey, these leads were good. These leads were no good. Here's information I'm hearing out in the marketplace. Here's requests that we're getting that we don't have a solution for. And so having that really aligned and coordinated is super important in order to achieve growth goals, because working in silos just doesn't work anymore. And, you need to enable the sales team to do their jobs effectively and be efficient by educating users, which again, we talked about the buyers want to educate themselves. So that's our jobs as marketers to make sure that's happening and that we're getting those people in the door once they're ready to, learn more and discover more and have a sales conversation.
Yeah. So do you think getting those, creating that more symbiotic relationship, is that about something like just making sure they're ultimately reporting up to the same person in a leadership role, or is it bigger than that?
I think it helps to have them both going up to the same leadership. So that's what I had at my last corporate job. Mm-hmm. But I think it is more than that. You've got to get them in the room at the same time as well. So they've got to be able to work effectively, communicate with one another, identify when that communication isn't happening or breaking down, and, course correcting thereafter. There are so many examples I have of the sales team giving information that really drove a lot of our marketing and even product development. And so, that's how I came to create a product development organization. My last role is because sales came and said, hey, the market is asking for this and we don't have this. But there's a lot of demand for it. And so then we create it. But then they're going to the marketing team as well and going, hey, this is a hot product that we have right now. There's a lot of demand for it. So maybe it's something we already have. Well, let's, as marketers, we have to be very nimble and agile and quick to change to marketing or to market dynamics. And so that could be one too, where that feedback goes from sales to the marketing team, and the marketing team can set up a campaign to take advantage of the fact that that's a hot product at that given time.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been trying to introduce that term sales enablement into more of my conversations lately, whether that's through, these podcast discussions or just content that I publish on my own on LinkedIn. But I think that's so key, is that sales enablement mindset really needs to be brought into the relationship between the sales and marketing, because I've always viewed marketing's role as like, what do we need to do to make a sale easier, right? Like, how can marketing support sales so that the whole process is more efficient and effective?
Right. Right? Definitely. Yeah. And then even post-sale, as you know, there's more marketing work to help retain those customers and get them to be loyal. And how do we get them to become brand advocates? So a lot of it's upfront and helping kind of get that initial sale on the client acquisition side. But then, there's continuing work from the marketing department as well, just to help. How do we increase retention? How do we cross-sell? How do we improve our average order value? How do we get those loyal customers, and can we set up a loyalty program? How do we get referrals from them?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are all such important marketing functions. I want to shift gears just a little bit and ask you about budgeting. So you talked about like some of the 3 buckets of ways that you find are like the best starting point. I'm also curious about budgeting. Like what are some of the fundamentals to starting that conversation about budgeting with the companies that you're working with? So, because I think a lot of times, particularly in the manufacturing space, they don't really know what to budget, right? Like they might know what they're able to budget and what they feel comfortable budgeting. But sometimes when I'm asked that question, I'm like, well, if you're not able to budget enough, you might be better off like taking a couple extra vacations next year.
Right.
I mean, I'm joking a little bit, but
Right.
but also it's like you want to make sure that enough is budgeted and it's not just based on, well, this is what's comfortable. It has to be based on something that would be more strategic and based on some analytics, right? And so could you give us a little insight into the budgeting process that you find to be successful?
Sure. Yeah. So at a real high level, I'd like to share statistics on kind of what the average B2B, and it can differ by size of company and by industry. But you look at B2B companies, it's generally around 7 to 8% is the average of revenue is spent on marketing. It's a little bit higher for B2C, higher if you're in an early stage company and you're looking for more growth. But if you don't have, at least say 5% to spend on marketing, it is going to be a challenge if you're looking for big growth goals. And I'm with you. It's like if we don't have that percentage or minimum amount to spend on marketing, but you're expecting results, then it may not be worth investing at all. Otherwise, you're dabbling. A very minimal couple $1,000s a month isn't really going to get you much, and it's not going to be able to drive results that you're looking for. And then you're going to get frustrated and you're going to be upset that you spent your $2,000 or $3,000 a month and didn't see immediate results from it. So I think, I'm about zero-based budgeting. It doesn't have to be, it's got to, fall right at 7 or 8%. It's here are the things that we need to do in order for you to hit your growth goal. And here's what that's going to cost. And at the end of the day, is that in a reasonable range for a company of your size and your industry? And if that answer is yes, then, it should be an easy decision to move forward. I will say I've worked with a lot of companies and helped them grow. And at a minimum, they're investing 5%, many of them 10 to 15% of revenue in marketing. So yeah, I usually what I see with clients that are, of that size I'm looking for kind of mid-market is they'll stall out at revenue somewhere, say maybe 15, 20 million. And all the things that worked for them to get to that number is no longer working. So they may have a couple of salespeople. They grew very quickly from 0 to 20 million, but the last 3 years, they've kind of been right at that 20 million mark and they're not growing. And they feel like there's opportunity for more growth. Maybe they're trying to hire more salespeople and that's not effective. And the thing that I find is that, because one salesperson isn't going to be very efficient in spreading brand awareness. So you've gotten that low hanging fruit in the market and in your target audience, but we need to go beyond that to drive more demand. And doing that by making 10,000 phone calls to get 2 customers is not going to be the most efficient way to get there. Yeah. So I think drawing that plan out to show somebody, here's how we're going to get to your growth goals and here's what it's going to cost has been the most effective.
That was gold that you just laid out, because I think that is a very common obstacle, and people in leadership roles at those companies aren't necessarily sure about how to approach everything that you just talked about. And then I often see them very naturally jumping to, well, let's develop a strategy and start getting active in some of these channels where we know our clients are. But if you don't have that really business case with the budget behind it that is connected to your growth goals, it just leads to so many potential fails. So I think what you do in that budgeting area is so valuable. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing, I think the hesitancy sometimes for people is, well, I'm not guaranteed that I'm going to see this much return or this much revenue. And that's true. I mean, I have money in a 401k and in mutual funds, and I'm not guaranteed a return on those either. But history would tell me that that's the wise way to invest, and that there's, an average return over time.
That's a really good analogy. I like that. what if you are talking to a prospect or to a company and they're not even sure what to put down as their growth goals? Because it sounds like that's kind of a key part of the process, is being clear on those growth goals. What are some tips or suggestions that you would give to them at that point if they're having a tough time even being clear on those growth goals?
Yeah, I'm probably going to ask a lot of questions for where they want to grow or areas that could be growth drivers for them. So are there new markets that they could go after in terms of, new audiences? So if they are only selling into, say, retail, could they start selling into restaurants? So that's one way. Another way would be new product offerings or new services. So they can they add something on there? At the most basic is just getting a higher percentage of your addressable market in the market that you're in with the audience that you're in. So if there's a way that you think you can increase your market share in what you're doing already, that's probably the lowest hanging fruit. If you don't feel like you've kind of tapped out or maxed out on what you're going to get, relative to you and your competitors. So I like to ask a lot of questions and just what are the opportunities for growth? And then, sometimes I do hear a lot of, well, we don't really have a growth goal. Okay, well, let's start with something. How about, just 10%? What would that look like? What would that mean for you if you saw 10% more sales? Can your organization, especially in manufacturing, do you have the capacity to support that? So helping them get to a growth goal, I think, is important if they don't have that already. It's really hard to build a marketing strategy if there's not a goal that you're aiming for.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I think I would also be curious. This is a little bit of a subject change, but it's connected. What are some of the biggest challenges and or frustrations that you hear from your clients, especially at the beginning of building that relationship with them?
A lot of times what I see, and I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'll go into a little more detail, is maybe they've had a marketing coordinator or two that they've hired. Because, let's say if we as marketers are doing our jobs correctly, marketing looks really simple. And it should look simple to the outside, but there is a lot of data and strategy and research and methodology that goes behind it. And so if you're not in that marketing world and all you're seeing is social media posts and email newsletters, maybe that's all you think you need. And so you hire a marketing coordinator to do those things, but you see no results. And then you think marketing doesn't work for us, and you cut that expense and you're done with marketing because you've already come to the conclusion that it doesn't work. So I would say that's a big frustration, is they've dabbled in marketing before. They think they've tried marketing before and it didn't work and it was a waste of money. And so they're back to the drawing board, scratching their head going, okay, now how do I grow? I guess I'm just going to hire more salespeople.
Yes.
So I'm sure you probably run into that as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of times when we've run into that, I'm like, hiring another salesperson might not be the bad idea, but I don't think it's necessarily connected to why the marketing wasn't successful. Like even though those roles are more ingrained and more kind of integrated than ever before, it might not be wrong to hire another salesperson, but it might not also be the solution, the full, complete solution to why you're not achieving the growth goals that you have in place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's amazing to me how often I've heard people in leadership positions, whether it's sales leadership or, CEO president roles, but when they're not hitting their growth goals, they really come down on the sales team and say, you just need to sell more. You just need to sell more. And one of my sayings is just sell more is not a strategy. You're making an assumption that they're not doing everything that they possibly can to try to get more customers, and it's just not working. So we need to actually do something different, and there's a variety of things that could be, but just putting pressure on the sales team isn't going to get you to where you're going.
Yeah. That's a great point. What are some of the analytics tools that you think are just really core part of making or creating a successful marketing strategy?
Yeah, so there's a few. Google Analytics, of course, is always going to be part of that analytic tech stack. So understanding, who's visiting your website, what actions are they taking before they convert. A lot of that information can be used then to hone your digital marketing plan. So that's a key one. if you have marketing automation, I like to look at, the metrics in there. So email open rates and conversion rates from that. And then CRM, there's a lot of stuff that you can track in CRM to kind of help marry some of the online and offline data points together. So if you've sent a direct mail, for example, then, you can have, if you've got a good CRM with the analytics around it, then you can see that information there. Or you send a campaign or targeted to a customer, then you can see that information all in one place, which is key.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have preferred platforms? You mentioned Google Analytics, but under like CRM and marketing automation, do you see some platforms that are just really kind of best suited to help this B2B space?
Yeah. So my favorites, and they're the ones that I have experience with, but HubSpot I really enjoy because it's easy to use. So it's really well suited to that 20 million to say a couple 100 million size organization, because it's not as complex as the golden, Salesforce. So yeah. Salesforce and Pardot, I think are really good, solid. They're always going to be, leaders in the space, but there's technical components to that, you've got to send somebody to training and to really understand it in order to fully leverage the tool and set things up the way that you need them to be set up in order to get the analytics. Whereas HubSpot, I feel, is one, it's better supported by HubSpot, and then two, is more intuitive from a user interface.
Yeah, I agree with both of those, or all of the comments that you just made. That's definitely my experience as well. I think it also just depends on exactly what they're needing out of those systems as well. But I would say, like, generally speaking, HubSpot is probably the easiest platform to get started with if you're looking at CRM and putting some automation programs. It's not, it's not free. There is an investment you have to make into the platform, but I think it's worthwhile because of the efficiencies that you gain in your program. It's almost like having another staff member when you have that product in place.
Oh, definitely. And it gets back to, kind of what we've talked about, that alignment between sales and marketing and having sales enablement. Having a tool like HubSpot allows you then to get those leads in, put them through lead nurture and score them once they're ready for a sales handoff. Then it can be done there right in the tool without manual manipulation of all those touch points. Yeah. I have seen before, salespeople trying to send their own marketing emails and spending a lot of time doing that. And I just feel like, oh gosh, there are much easier ways to do this. Let us help you. We can automate all of this and send out a lot more emails and not take up your time. And your time is better spent then on having, conversations with customers and not trying to send marketing messages.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to make sure that I got a chance to ask you about e-commerce, right? So e-commerce, I think, in the B2B space is a growing market. And it's definitely something in the last probably 2 years in particular that our agency has gotten more requests for. And I'm just seeing, I also think it's a reflection of how buying behaviors are changing in the B2B space. But what are some of the trends you're seeing as it relates to e-commerce? B2B e-commerce?
Oh, yeah. I feel like, so people think e-commerce is B2C, and at the end of the day, the C is the same person that's making the decisions at a B2B. It might be different motives behind those decisions when you're working on behalf of a business versus buying something for yourself personally. But they still expect the same user experience. So yeah, I've seen a lot more of companies being open to setting up an e-commerce. Sometimes it seems like an enigma, and that can be a little bit of a non-starter for companies because they feel like it's hard and it's big and it's expensive and we don't even know where to start. But it really isn't. I mean, you break it down, it's really not that difficult. If you have a good leader that understands and is familiar with different e-commerce platforms and with user experience, can come in and dig into, who your customers are and what is that expectation of the experience that they want to have, and then designing a solution around it is not that difficult. There's so many off the shelf. I feel like way back in the day, early in my career, a lot of that stuff was hard coded. You had a big IT department that had to like code it in. Everything's off the shelf now. And so it's so much easier than what I think people think that it is. Yeah. Some things that we see, in B2B is you might not want to open up that e-commerce to everybody. You only have particular distributors or resellers that are, want to buy or that you will allow to buy your products, but there's ways to lock that down. So that's, not a problem. Or a trend that I'm seeing in manufacturing is wanting to go direct to consumer. So maybe they've only sold through distributors and resellers, but starting to realize that consumers are the end user oftentimes of their products. And if they can reach them efficiently online, then that's, a trend that I'm seeing. Before, they didn't want to get in that space because it's too expensive to get into the end user space, because it's too expensive to build out a, brick and mortar across the nation. But now you can reach them very efficiently through online means. That's something that I've done before as well, as building that direct to consumer channel through e-commerce.
I think that's huge. A lot of times those manufacturers that are accustomed to selling through distributors, it's because there is a certain size of an order, that gets them to achieve the pricing that makes the most sense for their distribution business. But if you look at the cost to implement an e-commerce solution and you can sell direct to consumers, you may have just expanded and opened a whole other channel, and you can put an ROI model together for the type of revenue growth that you can get by building that e-commerce platform. And that's just one example. I mean, I'm
right. Yeah. And you're getting retail margins instead of wholesale margins. So there's some margin expansion there. And a lot of times what I hear is people are afraid of that channel conflict. So they don't want to upset their distributors and resellers by competing with them directly through a direct to consumer. But there are ways around that as well to do that in a way that's going to be beneficial for, everybody involved. So
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it amazes me how these big platforms like Shopify is a huge example. Shopify has become known as the 800-pound gorilla for B2C, for consumer brands that want to sell their product online, but they have really beefed up their B2B offering and have some amazing tools available. Salesforce does as well. They have a whole commerce cloud solution. And then of course, it kind of looks like HubSpot is at the front end of getting into that industry as well.
Right.
The commerce industry. I've been reading a lot about that lately. So I think it's the companies that have the platforms are starting to see these trends as well. And their offerings are more robust than I think people might imagine.
Oh, yeah. And I have experience with Shopify. So when I built the direct to consumer e-commerce channel, it was on Shopify, and it's very robust, just the tools that they have built in. And it's almost like a CRM in itself. There's so much, segmentation that you can do, and, recency, frequency, and monetary analysis, and just a lot of very data rich information in there that you could use for your targeting and your marketing campaigns.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Okay. We could probably nerd out over all the e-commerce solution. That's like, to me, the most fun part about marketing is it blends so many different skill sets together. And depending on what you're interested in as like an individual worker, you can kind of decide which part, suits you and that you want to grow more, which area you want to grow in more. I think that's what the employees of our agency love. So there's so many different directions you can take it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And you may start off, in graphic design and then, move into user experience or, designing websites. There's a lot of different paths and tracks. I feel like marketing is an exciting place to be. And like you said, it changes all the time. And so if you're a person that likes that dynamic, and I'm very project oriented, so it works well for me, then I think it's a good area to go into.
Well, so Nikkie, I want to ask you one more question before I dive into my, I guess, non-marketing questions. The last question I wanted to ask you is if you got an opportunity to talk to, that $50 million manufacturing business as an example, if you got a chance to talk to somebody who's interested in learning more, what would you suggest as like how do they start? Like, what's the first step that they could take to really start figuring out how a marketing investment might work for them?
I think having a conversation with a marketing professional. And so whether that's a fractional or an agency, or even, if they have a friend that's experienced in marketing, I would not talk to a junior person in marketing. They have their role and it's a very important one, but they're not somebody that you want to talk to necessarily about strategy and how do you get started. So I would recommend having a conversation with somebody who's got a lot of experience in marketing, specifically in manufacturing, because there's a lot of nuances there, right? If you get somebody that's in B2C marketing, they may not understand your needs. But I think people that understand that industry, that are experienced in marketing, that would be a really nice, robust discussion.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, we'll come back at the end and make sure that we're clear on your contact information too, just in case anybody listening would want to talk to you directly and have that first conversation with you. I've got some fun questions to ask you first, and then we'll come back to that at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
I'm ready.
So these are my fun ones. I think they're fun anyway.
Okay.
Hopefully you do too. What's your favorite trip that you've ever taken?
Oh, goodness. Probably Costa Rica. So we took the family to Costa Rica for this last Christmas, and we met another family that we're really good friends with that have moved. They used to be our neighbors, but they've moved out. So we met them there and spent a week in Costa Rica, and it is beautiful. It's just amazing. Little monkeys everywhere, and beaches and rainforests. It was amazing. Volcanoes.
Yeah,
that was my favorite.
There's I'm assuming that you're kind of an active, adventurous type of person, because I've heard Costa Rica, there's like zip lining and all of these active things you can do as well. That sounds really fun.
Oh yeah, we did all the things, zip line and horseback riding and monkeys and all kinds of things, volcanoes. Yep. Oh, yeah, it was great.
I want to go there. Okay. Next question. If there is a musical group or artist and dead or alive that you wish you could have seen or could still see, who would that be?
Oh goodness. That is a tough one.
Are you a big music fan?
I am a music fan, but I go across a lot of genres. Okay. So I'm probably going to say Janet Jackson.
Ooh.
Would be one.
Okay.
I'm pulling her out of my 1980s teenager self. But she was kind of my favorite back in those days.
Okay.
I think she'd be high up there. Yeah.
Oh, she had the Janet. Wasn't that the name of her biggest? I'm going to say CD, which totally dates me, but that's how I bought it.
Well, at least you didn't say cassette tape.
Yeah. That's funny. Okay. Next question is about books. Is there a book that you find yourself recommending to people pretty frequently or often? It doesn't have to be a business book
or a fun book.
Anything.
Either.
Yeah, it's up to you.
One that I have recommended to a lot, and every member of my family, I've got 3 kids, every member of my family has read it. My kids are all adults, is the Trevor Noah book, Born a Criminal. It's a short read, but it's funny and it'll make you cry. And it's a good one. It's a good, short, light read. But really good. Yeah.
Is it like a life perspective type of?
It is. Yeah. Book? So it's kind of an autobiography. So his life growing up in South Africa. And yeah, it's interesting.
Okay. And then what is the best job you've ever had?
I'm going to say, outside of the one I have now, because this is what I truly have a passion for and really wanted to do. But my favorite job is more kind of a project within a job. So in my last role, when I created that direct-to-consumer e-commerce channel, that was the funnest project I think that I've worked on, because it was all the way from creating a brand to developing the website, to setting up the digital marketing plan, to driving leads, to getting it to revenue. So we launched that and grew it to 5 million within a couple of years. And that was just so satisfying to me. We were overachieving our goals that we set forth. And there's just something about that process that made it feel like it was my baby. Of course, there was a team that worked on it. I didn't develop the website myself. We had agencies, and I had a very nice team behind me that, we all pitched in and did, but it was something that I was the leader of, and it was fun. And that was my best project.
Yeah. It sounds like you got the satisfaction of seeing it through too, which is sometimes really hard. You don't often get that opportunity. You like have one little part of it that you work on, and then you disengage and other people take it from there. So that's pretty cool. You get to see it all the way through. Yeah.
That is one of the hardest parts, I think, about being in a fractional role, is a lot of times you're involved on the front end in developing that strategy and then kind of helping to execute the strategy and getting them going. But a lot of times what happens is then they become self-sufficient and, fly the nest. And so you don't really get to see then what happens after that. So some of the foundational things that you've set in place for them that started to work and started to generate revenue, you don't get to see it through till, for the next 2 years or 3 years.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way to connect back to the last question I have, which is how would you want somebody to get in touch with you if they're ready to start that journey, or even just have an initial conversation to see, how you might be able to help them with what I'll call their marketing journey?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So my email is just nikkie@flywheelcmo.com, and Nikkie is Nikkie. And then another way would be to come to my website. There's a contact us form. We can have, a free 30-minute discovery call to see, what your needs are, or see if we would be a fit. And this website is flywheelcmo.com.
Okay, awesome. And then I'm assuming people can find you on LinkedIn as well.
Yes. Yep. And I'm on LinkedIn. Okay. And again, Nikkie. I'm a little unique, and I have an extra E on my name, but that's how you find me.
Well, and we're going to include all of Nikkie's contact information in the show notes. So if you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be in the comment section, or if you're on our website, you can look in the show notes section, and we'll have all the links available there as well. So Nikkie, I just want to thank you so much for spending the afternoon and some of your time with us. I think I'm really hoping that the things that you shared will help get people over that initial hurdle, or overcome some of the challenges or obstacles that might be in front of them to just getting started.
Absolutely.
With marketing strategy. So thank you.
Yeah, I hope so. It's not scary. There's a method to it. And if you get the right, agency or person involved that's experienced in marketing, they'll hold your hand through it and make it very easy. So thank you again for having me on the podcast today. I appreciate it. It's been a fun discussion.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Please be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or visit our website at marketingrefresh.com.